kind of thing, and it may not be very long. I'm just going to play a little bit from the Apologetic Dog YouTube channel, Jeremiah Nortier and James White, talking about the debate we had, James White and I, and a couple of other things related to it. I can jump off here at any moment. It just depends on some things. And so we'll just kind of play it by ear. We may not get very far. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to play it, and I'm going to type that in the side chat.
Different topics, Molinism came up and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And it's just like, really? Okay. Bummer.
So one of my observations, being the unbiased moderator that I try to be.
Right.
One thing I noticed, AK is real quick to assert that you are presupposing the T in exegeting Romans 9. And, our presuppositional bells go off saying, well, of course, no one's neutral. We have different anthropologies. We have a more fundamental view that's different about who God is.
I did talk to Jeremiah on the phone. We had the discussion just a couple of hours before he went on with White. We talked about this. There's a big difference. I could not get Jeremiah to see it. I guess he'll just not see it. But there's a big difference here. I didn't just say Dr. White brings presuppositions. Dr. White argued for his presuppositions being necessary to his exegesis. He says we must start with presuppositions. He said that before the debate on the dividing line. He brought it up before Romans 9 in his opening. He relies on it to make the arguments in his exegesis, the conclusions of his exegesis. He explicitly says and makes the case at times, and did in the opening, that his presupposition of the T of tulip, which is a part of his Calvinist system, is an essential part of it. In other words, if you change the T of tulip, it will affect his exegesis. That's a big difference. Everything I presented to you in my exegesis of verses 1 through 24, I did not argue for my case, and not only did I not argue for free will, libertarian free will, if I were to grant to you that it was false, that there was no such thing as libertarian free will, it would not affect what I presented. Now, I believe the last few chapters may have, but it would not have affected what I offered, the debated portions. So it wasn't essential to the exegesis I offered. That's the difference. It's a big difference.
And so he said a number of times, I didn't make an argument for free will. I don't have to presuppose it. And I'm thinking, AK, you have that as a tool in your tool belt. You think it's necessary, and if you're pressed on it, you in a disjunctive way say our side can't make sense of the exegesis, and so it's broken logic.
First of all, Dr. White's side not only can't make sense of it, that was part of my rebuttal. Dr. White argued for it in his opening. You have to know what burden of proof is. When one says, here's my exegesis, and what is necessary in the way I exegete is my presupposition of X, whatever it may be. Okay. Yes, but I do not grant to you X in the first place. So you have to leave that out. If your system that I deny in a debate does not grant to you your presuppositions, and if you rely on one part of your system denied to establish another part of your system in the exegeted passage, in the debated passage, then you are begging the question, meaning it's not a proof text. It's not a proof text for Calvinism was the whole point. You have to know the difference.
Point about his view of man in relation to God. So anytime he points the finger at your presuppositions, I'm like, there's multiple presuppositions pointing right back at you.
But I did not argue for them. I'll say it. I don't know how clearly I could say it more than that. I believe I have presuppositions. You have to know the argument. I never claim I don't have presuppositions. Everybody, when they're exegeting a passage, you just have to know the difference. You cannot, everybody wants to treat this the same as if it's a topical debate, and you cannot do it. Dr. White doesn't seem to understand that, even though he rakes Leighton Flowers over the coal for it. They're all caught up on the presupposition on total depravity, how valid it was to the debate, but it can't, not for Leighton Flowers, though. When Leighton Flowers does it, no, it's not valid. Now, I do it differently than Leighton Flowers. When I exegete a passage in a debate, I do it, I don't go the route that Leighton Flowers goes, and he does what he wants to do. Everybody does it something different. I'm not saying something negative. I'm just saying it's not what I do. But Leighton Flowers can't do it, and Dr. White and Jeremiah are saying, no, it's very valid. You have to. Well, not when your name is Leighton Flowers, I guess. But again, we all understand we have presuppositions. But if I'm relying on a presupposition that is denied by my opponent, and I rely on that for the exegesis of the passage of the debate, then I cannot treat it as a proof text. I have to concede that, well, it's not really a proof text unless other things are true. You have to know the difference. They're not getting it. They're not getting the difference.
Which is a self-refuting point. If he's going to say, well, I don't really have any presuppositions that I'm bringing to the text, I can just let it...
I didn't say, again, I actually told this to Jeremiah. We talked hours before this discussion, and I explained it. I remember him saying that to me. I said, Jeremiah, I didn't say that I don't bring presuppositions. I even stopped him mid-sentence, and I said, I'm not saying I don't have presuppositions or that I don't bring. We all bring presuppositions. But if some of the presuppositions that you're bringing, if they are necessary for establishing your case in Romans 9, that is being debated. That's called begging the question. You have to know, this is the way it is. It's the nature of an exegetical debate as opposed to a topic.
Read and say, it just says what it says, which is a very Church of Christ line, if you didn't know.
Yeah, that's a
which is not something that I really said. I said, my argument in the opening was properly exegeted. There's nothing really that, until you get to the end maybe, but the debated portions, which is all I got to, I said, the only things here are things we would actually agree on until you bring in things that are not there. Rob, Matt, Joey, I appreciate you guys. And I appreciate the compliments. This is not, I'm just jumping on. I'll just tell you that it could end at any time. We'll just see how far it goes. Appreciate you guys joining me. And I know the lighting is bad, but that's okay. Okay. Let's see what I got here.
Should be pointed out that there were expressions of concern before the debate about his Church of Christ alignment and making that a big issue. And I did not try to push that. It came up once in regards to justification by faith. What about baptism? You know, he actually brought that up.
Not a chance. You're totally twisting what happened. Dr. White, you are twisting what happened. And that's okay, because I am going to untwist it. And anybody who watches the debate will see it straight. I actually asked Jeremiah, do you think he's, honest question, do you think he's just not remembering this correctly? Or do you think he's being dishonest? Jeremiah said, I think he's misremembering it. Well, I hate to say it. I don't know how he could remember it. He brought up baptism, not me. He just said I brought it up. And he's been saying several times in this program and other times that he didn't want to press me on the Church of Christ background to derail the debate. He did, in fact. I'm the one that said, not on topic. If you want to discuss it, we can, but but it's not on topic. And then he did not wish to pursue it. He brought up baptism. So what he did was he kept asking me something about justification by faith, which was not really the topic. It wasn't, because it was from Romans 8. And he kept asking me, and I knew, well, he's getting to something, and I'm not quite sure what. And then I realized, it dawned on me that, he's wanting to say something about baptism. Well, and so I said, I know where you're going. And then he said, the whole audience does. Well, and yet he doesn't remember all that. He says, I brought it up. That's how bad his memory is. So he could explicitly, in the debate, he brings it up, and then I say, I know where you are going. And he says, everybody does, and then he remembers it as me bringing it up. At this point, I'm having a hard time believing that he misremembers it. And I like to give benefits of the doubt. I really do. He brought it up, and they are all hung up on this Church of Christ background when it had nothing to do with the topic. Someone says he never actually mentioned baptism. No, he implied it. That's what he was getting at. Okay, again, he brought it up. He conceded in the debate that he was asking me about baptism. I'll say it to you again. Go check it out and prove me wrong. You won't be able to, but anybody go and try to prove it otherwise. he kept asking me, we're justified by faith? Is that it? And I said, he's getting at something here. I saw my friend Jeremiah here that you see on the screen smiling because he does all kinds of Church of Christ stuff. And I said, I know where you're going, Dr. White. Okay, I know where you're going. And he says, the whole audience knows, which means, yeah, everybody knows where I'm going. And I said, you want to ask me about baptism? He says, yeah, well, if you're uncomfortable with it. So he did concede he was asking about baptism. Okay.
He looked at me too. I was smiling so big.
Yeah, the reality is he effectively kept from having to present a coherent, understandable position, theology on Romans 9. Well, I don't have to do this and I don't have to do that. Well, yeah, you do, and you didn't, and that makes it hard to deal with you. But it also leaves the audience going, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to believe about this, other than however I end up interpreting it. It can't have anything to do with Calvinism.
He always says that. Dr. White says, well, it just can't have anything to do with baptism or Calvinism. He represents that. I got the light going off here, but that's okay. I won't be on here long. No, I didn't say it can't be about Calvinism. I said that it's not. And people know what I said. They can follow what I said. He keeps wanting to frame this as people don't know what AK believes. I don't know what to deal with. Dr. White is having a hard time with this. That's what it is. Dr. White is having a hard time with it.
That seems to be the big thing as a takeaway there. So I think someone who watches that debate, they're going to walk away knowing what I believe the text says and how that fits in my overall theology. But I don't think they're going to have any idea. I think
they'll have an idea. All they got to do is listen to it. I mean, I exegeted it and I gave an exegesis right through the verses. So misframing, misrepresentation is all Dr. White is doing, and it's just not dignified of someone of his caliber. Not dignified. He keeps representing me as getting off topic. No, I was bringing him on topic constantly throughout the debate, and I don't know how many times I could prove that. You just have to look at it, and everybody knows that I stayed on topic, and so. He's trying to represent it as if I was getting off topic and he stayed on topic. That's backwards. That's false. He's representing this as if I was uncomfortable talking about Church of Christ background. I was not. It was just not on topic. And I said we could talk about it. Misrepresentation after misrepresentation.
During the audience questions, he affirmed certain things that, to be honest with you, pretty much purely Pelagian.
He does not believe essence. We're born in original sin. That's one of the big things with Church of Christ theology.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
That's not just Church of Christ. Other people believe that as well. The label of Pelagian, I don't care if people want to call me Pelagian. The question is it biblical? Now, when Calvinists say you're a Pelagian, they say that assuming Calvinism is better. Well, I don't grant to you that Calvinism is better. Calvinism is an irrational theology that is contradictory, inconsistent, and it is a theology that makes God look terrible. It makes him look like the author of sin. That's the necessary implication of it. It implies that he's the author of sin. It degrades his mercy and his compassion. And, it's the equivalent of a firefighter setting fire to a building that kills several people, but then the firefighter goes in and rescues people and tries to take glory in the fact that he rescued people whom he put in danger in the first place, and then let other people die, of course. So
he calls it the influence of sin.
We didn't get into, but I think they are really, really important when you ask questions like, those whom he called, he justified. Okay, what does it mean to be justified? And if you have a very non-Pauline understanding of the imputation of the righteousness of Christ, the nature of faith, whatever else it might be, I think that's really important. I really think it is.
Well, it may be important, but it wasn't the topic. That's the point. Reformed Redneck, I would actually, I challenge you on that. I say my understanding of Calvinism is probably better than yours.
Do you remember when you debated Paul Barker many years ago?
Okay, this is irrelevant.
Since I was sitting sort of from...
So forth. But anyway, the Church of Christ, to me... Yeah, go ahead.
But by the way, that does and I'll forget this if I don't mention now. You sent me the screenshot of the discussion of this debate that was that had A.K. Richardson and Leighton Flowers, and the guy who calls himself the idol killer. And I was, in a sense, I looked at that and said, well, I obviously should not have worried too much about AK's feelings. Because
And who told you to worry about my feelings? I mean, did you not see my past debates? Now, I don't know what's in his head, but my theory is, which could be wrong, he keeps saying that, but he mentioned several times before the debate how the debate I had with Matt Slick on Romans 9 got very heated. I think actually what Dr. White was worried about was he knows if he pushes, I push, and he was a little afraid of pushing on them sore spots, like those inconsistent answers about God's patience and his decree.
if you're going to jump on with these guys, okay, well, I was obviously way too nice. But you said that on that program, A.K. Richardson actually said that he would rather be an open theist than a Calvinist. Is that,
I told him that, yeah, and I talked to AK. I said, dude, that hurt my heart. I was like, he said, well, I'd rather be a Calvinist than a Roman Catholic. I was like, no, don't change it. I said, you said you'd rather be an open theist. I said, look.
That's not how the conversation happened. I don't know why Jeremiah is saying that. He never said the words at all, don't change it. In fact, I didn't say that part until after my rationale of why I said I'd rather be an open theist than a Calvinist. So there was a whole me explaining why, and then it developed into I'd rather be, hey, look, if it hurts, but listen, I'd rather be a Calvinist than a Catholic. What I said was, inasmuch as open theism says something that I don't agree with about God's knowledge, Calvinism says something about his character, which is worse. Now, they don't have to agree with that, but that's my perspective. If you have a set of beliefs over here that implies, as I understand it, that God is something diminishing about God's knowledge, but then a set of beliefs over here that I believe diminishes his character, I'm going to go with this one over here. And I said to him, I would rather be called stupid than evil. I don't like either, but I'd rather be called stupid than evil. Okay? Open theists say nothing about his character. You may not like what they say about his knowledge, but you got Calvinism, its claims imply that he is the author of sin. Okay? Yeah, I'd rather be an open theist than a Calvinist. Absolutely.
Now, I'm not saying I'm making an infallible judgment on someone's soul, but I just said open theism has made God in their image. It's a different God. I mean, you got to believe in the right Jesus, and you got to believe in the right gospel of grace to have your sins forgiven. I just said I can't endorse or be charitable to someone who says that God learns as man learns. And as you said, the idol killer.
Well, people say the same thing about Calvinists. They say, I cannot be charitable to someone whose claims imply that God is the author of sin. And irrational stuff. Like, I can't believe in a God who decreed for me to not believe the truths. You see, in Calvinism, God decrees for most of his own people to misunderstand and despise the truth of soteriology. Now, how inconsistent is that? How irrational is that? That God actually decrees for most of his own people to actually oppose and not understand, so they claim, the truth of soteriology. Anyway, I didn't want to be on here very long. I appreciate you guys joining in, nevertheless, on a spur of the moment. And next podcast or whatever, another time I can get on, we'll talk more about these things. There's a lot being said about these issues. Dr. White is having a very hard time after this debate. Hey, guys, I really appreciate you. Thanks for joining Spur of the Moment here.